And a very good morning to you, Minister.
Hello, good morning.
Thanks so much for joining us. I want to get your announcement about nurseries in a little bit, but you might have heard Maury and I just discussing the top story of the day relating to Angela Rayner. I was wondering if you could just clarify the timeline for it, when it is your understanding that Angela Rayner finally got the advice that she was in the wrong, and indeed when that information reached the Prime Minister.
Yes, hello, good morning. So I'll do my best to set out the timeline for you. Obviously, this originally, the Deputy Prime Minister sought advice at the point of purchase of the house, which enacted in line with the advice that she received. She then subsequently sought expert advice on that. That original version returned on Monday, but it wasn't later clarified until the Wednesday, further questions that were addressed through the advice. But what also had to happen was that the Deputy Prime Minister needed to seek the permission of the court for an order to be lifted in relation to her family. That only came back on Tuesday evening. So until that point, the Deputy Prime Minister had been more limited in what she could say in public. Once that had come back, alongside the final legal advice that was provided, she was then in a position to make a full statement and to take part in an interview that she did with your channel in order to set out her family circumstances and the actions that she had taken.
And the Prime Minister, I think, most vociferously this week was still defending her in kind of almost always in a BBC interview at 2 p.m. on Monday. So presumably, even though Angela Rayner had got her advice back by Monday, the Prime Minister was not aware at 2 p.m. on Monday when he did that BBC interview that she had underpaid tax.
As I say, the additional complication here is also the court order that was in place until Tuesday evening. And of course, you know, we all have responsibilities to make sure that we're acting in line with how the law will operate, especially where that relates to court orders and family situations, as was the case here. So it was once the order was lifted on Tuesday evening and once the final legal advice that had been returned on Wednesday that the Deputy Prime Minister was then in a position to set out, as she did, very fully what had happened, her family circumstances, and she gave a full statement and a full interview. I do think it is right that she did that she sought to be as transparent as possible, even though, as you'll appreciate, this is difficult because it relates to, you know, quite sensitive personal and family matters. But she has been open about that, and you'll know that the process is now that the independent advisor will look into all of the information here, will consider everything that is given to him. He will have whatever he needs, as you would expect, and it's therefore for the independent advisor to look at all of this and to reach a conclusion. And I can't speculate on that because it is, as I say, independent, and it wouldn't be appropriate for me to do so.
So maybe the Prime Minister's hands were tied by legal matters, but was he aware on Monday that she'd underpaid tax?
Well, the Deputy Prime Minister has been clear for some time that she believed she'd acted in good faith, that she had paid what was required of her through that house purchase. It then became clear subsequently that that wasn't the case, that additional stamp duty was owed. That was following new, fresh legal advice. But as I say, there were limitations on what could be discussed, given the existence of a court order that was there to protect her family and to protect her son.
OK. I mean, I guess the implication of that is that the information did reach the Prime Minister on Monday. Do you personally think she should resign?
My view is that we have an independent process and an independent advisor, and that's there for a reason. I'm not going to prejudge it. I can't speculate on it because I'm a member of the government. I have responsibilities too in terms of how I conduct myself. I do think it's right that the independent advisor now looks at all matters in the case, all facts, and he has the time and whatever he needs in order to reach his conclusion.
I guess what I'm coming to on this is whether you therefore regret in opposition the way in which your party repeatedly and regularly called for various people caught up in different types of issues, whether it was Boris Johnson and legal advice around proroguing Parliament, Priti Patel and accusations of bullying, Nadeem Zahawi with a tax-related case, Owen Paterson. The list goes on. And in opposition, always called for resignations immediately, jumped on that bandwagon. To be fair, somewhat as the Conservatives are doing now with Angela Rayner. But do you regret that that is where we are in politics, and acknowledge that in opposition you did the same?
I think that it's right in politics that we, all of us, hold ourselves to high standards. I think that's what the public expect. It's what the Prime Minister expects of us as government ministers. I mean, I won't dwell too much in the past because I don't think your viewers would be particularly interested in my opinions on that. They're probably more interested in the here and now. But some of the cases that you talked about there, what we didn't actually see were people willing to submit themselves to further scrutiny. We saw in some cases those who were found to have done things wrong appointed back into cabinet positions. So I think there are differences, but, you know, I won't dwell on that. I think what people want to know now is that where there's any suggestion that the rules haven't been followed, that that's looked into thoroughly, properly, and through the independent process. Angela Rayner believes she acted in good faith in the decisions that she has taken, that following further advice coming to her on this matter, she sought to set that straight. She knows that there was a mistake was made. It's right now that that independent process runs its course. It's why we've strengthened that role. It's why we have a revised ministerial code to make sure that those of us who hold ministerial office are held to the highest standards. I know that's something the Prime Minister believes to be very important. It's something that we all as a government believe to be incredibly important too.
I think people do prefer to look forward, but I think if there's a potential element of hypocrisy, then they understand if we do look backwards. And I'll just read you this, because this was whilst an investigation was still pending. What the Prime Minister, then Leader of the Opposition, said regarding Nadeem Sahawi. He said, "Anybody watching this would think it's fairly obvious that someone who seeks to avoid tax cannot also be in charge of tax. Yet for some reason, the Prime Minister, then Rishi Sunak, cannot even bring himself to acknowledge the question." I mean, that is sort of what's happening right now. Angela Rayner is in charge of the housing department, and we're talking about housing tax. That was in the middle of an ongoing investigation, and we're in the middle of one now. And I guess, can you understand why people look at this? And maybe politics is wrong, and the result should always be all journalists and all politicians always wait for the full independent inquiry to report. But if we look back at the last Parliament, that's not really what happened. And I'm just asking you whether you can understand, therefore, why people are saying, why hasn't the Prime Minister been more decisive on this?
Of course, I can understand that the public want to know that those of us who hold public office, ministerial office, hold ourselves to high standards and are held accountable. I think there are differences in terms of the cases that you've just set out there. And again, without dwelling too much on the past, because there have been changes made subsequently, in so much as we have a Prime Minister that will always act to make sure that standards are maintained. What we saw previously under the last government were a number of occasions where people were not held accountable for wrongdoing, where Prime Ministers didn't take action, where cases didn't go forward for consideration. And what we have here in the case of the Deputy Prime Minister is that she has sought to be open and transparent about what has taken place, including where that does relate to quite sensitive matters in relation to her family, and that she has then immediately referred herself to the independent advisor on ministerial standards. So that is important. That process will now run. But yes, I do recognise that what the public want to see are high standards in public life, politicians seeking to do the right thing. I believe that, as does the Prime Minister, and I know that is also true of the Deputy Prime Minister, who will, of course, do whatever is required of her through that process in order to satisfy the independent advisor who will be doing his work.
Education Secretary, tell me what you're announcing today.
So what I'm announcing today is that we'll be opening even more school-based nurseries starting from next year, as well as the ones that are opening at the moment. So I'm speaking to you this morning from the North West, one of the first of the school-based nurseries that are creating over 4,000 more places for parents. That goes alongside the 30 hours of government-backed childcare, again, from this month for working parents. That will put £7,500 back into parents' pockets. It will make a really big difference in supporting families, and it's all about giving children the best start in life. But there's even more to come, and today I'm announcing the second phase where schools can apply to be a part of this. So where schools have got space that's available, space that they want to use, they can open it up and develop it and turn it into a nursery, which is really convenient for parents. Rather than having to do multiple drop-offs, they get one drop-off. And as you can probably see behind me, some of that's already happened, and I think it demonstrates the importance and commitment that this government has to backing families and supporting children.
Bridget Phillipson, thanks so much for joining us. It's good to see you this morning.
Thank you.